The Amber Monolith by Monte Cooke. The Catechism of Lore. All glory to the originators of truth and understanding. Praise to the innovators of steel and synth. Praise to the shapers of flesh, of bone, and of mind. Glory to those who resculpted the sustaining earth and life-giving sun. Praise to the senders of signals who even now whisper into the machine's ears and give life to the inanimate. Praise to those who travel to the stars and the realms beyond the stars. All glory to the originators of truth and understanding. Let us then resume the recitation of the sacred chronicle of High Father Calavar, Amber Pope and founder of the Citadel of Conduit and the Order of Truth, as written by his grandniece, Aurora of Silent Song. Chapter 9. Wind of Iron, in which we learn the lesson of dictation. Calaval climbed the hill, his pet Thunum at his side. Crumbling bits of ancient brick turned to gravel with each step. At the top, he saw the amber obelisk of the old woman had told him about. It stretched impossibly into the sky. The reddish-yellow light of the old tired sun caught in its angles high above the plain of ruin. Even after all these eons, the machine at the heart of the obelisk still thrummed with power. Rings orbited the device, spinning with unearthly precision. The Thuman sat on its haunches, multiple jointed legs folded beneath it. It looked up at its master with narrow black eyes. Red dust covered the furry crest upon its head. Calaval set his heavy pack down next to him, exhausted. He bent down and brushed the dirt and dust away from it. And then from his clothes, finally, he brushed the red dust from the Thuman. What word, Thetic, sorry. He whispered, "You won't have to go inside. I'll do that alone." Thetic's gaze, as always, made it seem as though he understood. After a short rest, the pair resumed their journey. The people in the last village, Cloud Ridge, had called this the Plain of Brink. The lack of creativity did not surprise Calaval. A simple folk without a clave, they toiled in the fields and herded Sherash in the fertile valley to the south. But they had given him the food in exchange for a few baubles and shins he carried with him, and gave him a place to sleep, so it was difficult to feel anything but kindly towards them. Isolated villages with Aeon priests often become fearful of strangers and dangerous insulars. Once he had come upon a community that had stumbled upon a buried facility from prior worlds while digging a well. They had inadvertently released a noxious gas, transforming the entire population to maniacal, superhuman cannibals. Jeez. Calaval had barely escaped alive. Aeon priests, and their knowledge of Numenera could prevent incidents like that. Calaval sought to join their ranks. History taught that the ancient races that had dwelled upon the earth before the Ninth World wielded great power. This power came from knowledge. It might not be possible if Calaval, the Aeon priest, or anyone else on Earth of the present to master all the that knowledge, but sure there would be secrets there lost to the past upon which they could build a future. Kalaval was certain of this. It just had to be discovered, or rather rediscovered. He had a plan on how to start. A red cloud rose on the horizon, beyond the obelisk in the sky. Someone moving across the dry plain? Certainly something big if it was that close. If that was the case, sorry. Perhaps a herd. Perhaps a pack of raiders. Fennec whined. The cloud loomed larger. No herd, no creature at all. A dust storm. Kalaval unpacked his desert filter and put it over his mouth. Then he fitted one over Fennec's nose and mouth. The beast pawed it a few times, but accepted quickly. They had been through dust storms together before. The barren plain offered little shelter. Kalaval kept walking, for there were few other options. The Thuman stayed close. The wall of onrushing red engulfed the obelisk and bore down upon the explorers like a monster. Through his filter, a scent caught the young man's attention. It jolted a memory. It triggered fear. Iron wind! Kalaval looked around helplessly for some kind of shelter, but there was nowhere to hide. Not from the wind. He would stand against the ravenous of the sandstorm, even as it tore at his flesh, but iron wind was something different altogether. It didn't just tear flesh, it altered it. Within the wind lived particles crafted by Numenera, far too tiny for a man to see. Kalaval wasn't actually certain that the particles was the right word. Creatures? Machines? Is a past understanding. Nanomachines. His pack thudded on the ground. He rummaged through his contents while the Thuman whined. Finally, he produced a small iron awl, and a device that looked like it meant to fit it snugly in a person's fist. If a person had 6 fingers. In 2 places across its synth surface, small wires laid exposed. Kalaval crouched down low. A small glass panel on one side showed lighted symbols when he pressed a small stud where his thumb would fit. Really messed up that sentence. He didn't know what the symbols meant, but he knew that when a symbol like that reminded him a bit of a bird in the flight flashed, he needed to press the stud again. He glanced up and saw the rolling red cloud approach, ignoring the sweat beading at the bridge of his nose. Kalaval pushed the ale up into the cavity among the exposed wires near the bottom. The device shook a bit, and there was a sizzling sound, and the smell of burnt air. Suddenly, a droning noise engulfed Kalaval, and the nerves all along his flesh tingled unexpectedly. The awl slipped from his hand. He clenched the device and pulled Fennec close. The Thuman squirmed as the air around them shimmered. The hair on Kalaval's arms rose and his skin prickled. The shimmering air smelled like a thunderstorm. He knew that it was sort of a halo around him, an aura, a field. He did not know, but he hoped that the field would repel the dangerous, unseen things in the iron wind. Approaching the Numenera storm, the approaching Numenera storm did not offer him much time to wonder if it would work. The air was suddenly red, churning. The generator in his hands vibrated at a terrible frequency. It numbed his hand and then his arm. He concentrated on holding fast to it, even though he could no longer feel it. He told himself that the billions of tiny shrieks in the wind were but his imaginations. The iron wind roiled around him, but it did not harm him. With a whine that quickly became a howl, Fedek twisted from his grasp and pulled away. Kalaval shouted without a sound. The beast's leftmost limbs and sides emerged from the shimmering distortion and entered the wind. Kalaval did not see what happened, nor could he still hear his companion. Thuman's body thrashed. Kalaval grabbed a handful of Fedek's hair and held on as best he could, while the device in his other hand numbed more and more of his body, weakening every muscle he had. He closed his eyes. The wind passed more quickly than any storm would, but none too quickly for Kalaval. The device dropped from his contorted and numb fist into the stony ground. He collapsed, but was careful to pull Fedek on top of him, rather than fall upon the beast. Fedek made a pitiful moan unlike anything Kalaval had ever heard. When he could manage it, Kalaval lifted his head to look at his pet. Hundreds of tiny worm-like tendrils flailed where Fedek's left two limbs had once been. The flesh around those legs, along with all of the left side, looked and felt like metallic plates. Orifices that Kalaval could not begin to understand erupted and closed in on the beast's new proportions. The left side of his face contorted with opening and closing eyes, as if a crowd of smaller creatures have taken up residence in its head. The wind had rewritten the Thuman. Not the Thum. This ain't dragon blood. This ain't dragonborn here. Every bit of its flesh that the wind had touched, it changed. Kalaval pushed Fedek from on top of him and stood. His stance was not steady, but he hardly noticed. He looked only at his long-time companion, slowly writhing on the ground. Pain was evident in every fiber of the creature, new and old. With a wail, Kalaval drew a long knife from his Kalaval drew the long knife at his side from his leather sheath. He held his breath, tears streaming from down his face. He wanted to close his eyes, but he feared his aim would fail, so he stared down at Fedek. He watched his friend's eyes as he sliced into the non-metallic part of its neck. Blood pooled from around the creature. It died in silence. Kalaval did not curse the gods his mother had taught him, nor did he pray to them for mercy. It wasn't that he did not believe in vast non-human intelligence living in the sky above. He had seen them orbiting in Yesai's telescope night after night. He just did not believe that they directed events. He believed that in cause and effect, not gods. Even the things inhabiting the data web were created, the results of someone's knowledge and understanding. He believed in the universe and its laws, set in motion billions of years earlier. Just because the people of this world called it magic did not mean that he could not see beyond. That was what the Aeon priest did, and hard as it was to accept, that is what he would do too. The Numenera, as the priests call it, arose because of the intelligence of people of prior worlds. It only seems like miracles. It only seems like damnation. Chapter 10, Alone, in which we learn the lesson of loss. Alas, Chapter 10 is lost to us. It is believed by the Council that it contained details of Kalaval's mourning of his animal, and thus described his compassion and capacity for love. Likely also detailed his fantastic intelligence, particularly his near-perfect recall, and his great wisdom, often being well prepared for contingencies as most others would never have foreseen. Instead of its contents enriching us, lets us contemplate on the significance of lost knowledge. No greater loss exists. All glory to the originators of truth and understanding. Wow. Okay. Okay, next chapter. Chapter 11. Entering the Obelisk, in which we learn the lesson of perseverance. Sorry. Okay. The Amber Monolith. Wow, I screwed it up in just the first... Okay. Alright. The Amber Monolith rose high above Carnival. Almost directly below the obelisk machine, the noise that the vast spinning mechanisms produced drowned out the sounds of his own weary breath. The rotating rings moved and thrummed in rhythm and heartening. In rhythm that heartened him? Okay then. It was exactly what he was looking for. The old woman in Cloud Ridge had told him the truth. Calaval had only one last trick in his bag. The rest of his contents were mundane supplies, tools, and equipment. But he had saved one minor bit of Numenera just for this moment. He pulled a wire mesh belt from the bag and fitted it around his waist. The metal device on the side of the belt had some simple controls. Some bits of technology like this, ciphers, most people call them, seemed like they were once part of other, larger devices. Those who had come before him had just figured out a way to make use of them in a temporary, usually one shot and damn the risk sort of way. Calaval knew a lot of the tricks. He didn't fully understand how they worked. No one knew he did, but he... Oops. Hang on. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay, Calaval knew a lot of tricks. Alright. No one knew he did, but he knew enough to try that switch, or cross these wires, or look for a readout with this symbol on it. Enough to sometimes get an effect he wanted. Sometimes he could use, like now. Except the belt wasn't like that. The belt, Calaval felt sure, was intended for precisely the purpose for which he was about to use it. The only thing was the way it fit him. Obviously, it had been designed for a creature other than a human to wear. Calaval manipulated the controls. Soundlessly, his feet left the ground. Buoyant, he floated upwards. Superman. The belt gently removed him from the grasp of gravity. He soared even higher. The red brick landscape stretched below him. A warm wind tugged at his tan leather clothing. His coat, his cap, it brushed against his worn, unshaven face. Above him, the Amber Monolith drew closer, and he could see that, true to its name, the yellowish-brown structure offered a translucent surface in contrast to the silvery metallic mechanism at its heart. The obelisk offered a pointed top and bottom, but the center was a massive clockwork device, with spinning rings orbiting around it at skewed but somehow externally precise angles. As he got very close, likely hundreds of feet above the ground, the very lowest point of the hover obelisk offered a metallic hatch to Calaval. Controlling his horizontal positions presented some difficulties. Once again, the position of the belt's console suggested a wearer with a very different body type than his. His arms grew sore from reaching down and around to touch on the tiny glowing panels. The wind made things even harder. Calaval maneuvered towards the hatch, but then the breeze carried him off to the wrong direction again. The situation suggests how hard it might be to be a leaf in the breeze with an objective, or even a butterfly. Calaval fumbled around the belt's controls over and over, grasping at the hatch as he got close each time failing to reach it. He began to worry about how much power the belt had, how long duration the gravity nullifying effect offered. His arms sore from each stretching in different directions, in different awkward positions. He tried one last time, and finally maneuvered close enough to loop his arm around through the handle on the hatch like a hook. Genius. The incoherent sound he made was a moan of exasperation and a cry of triumph at once. Then the power of the belt gave out. His own sudden weight jerked on his arm, wrenching it with a painful crack noise. Ouch. Agony shot down his shoulder and into his side. He grabbed his wrist with his free hand to make it harder for him to slip loose, but he almost blacked out from the pain. God. Dangling from the bottom of the obelisk, he gasped for breath he could not seem to get. His mind swam, and he had to fight to keep focus. Keep a focus. Finally, because if he did not, he knew he would soon faint and fall. He let go of his own wrist and thrashed at the hatch to try and find a way to open it. That task, at least, was surprisingly simple. An easy-to-move lever was produced at a sudden hiss. And then the hatch opened slowly. Slowly. Sorry. Carnival struggled to hang on to the moving hatch. When it stopped, he twisted his body around to look up into the opening it gave. It was dark, but a metallic ladder offered a way up through the amber shaft. Okay. With his free hand, he grabbed the bottom rung, but as he did, his other arm wrenched free. Again, terrific pain lanced through his body from shoulder to hip. Good God, how's he gonna fix that? He bit down on his tongue, which may have been the only thing that kept him conscious, his one arm dangling uselessly. He had no idea how he would climb up the ladder. He did the only thing that he could think of, and pulled himself up as high as he could, and kicked his leg up onto the hook He kicked his leg up to the hook, up to hook it onto the rung. After a few tries, he succeeded. But when he did, his pack came loose and spilled its contents down a long way to the ground. Thoughts of gods to curse once again came to his mind. Once again, he refused. He's not having good luck, is he? Okay. Chapter 12. In which we learn the lesson of ingenuity. Then we get brainy. The climb was long and agonizing. Every surface around Carnival vibrated slightly with a constant thrum. What's with these words? That kept time with the spinning rings of the central heart of the monolith. Even the air seemed to shake, ever so slightly. Exactly the rhythm he had memorized, the one he had been looking for. The top of the amber shaft offered light too dim to see, and Carnival had lost his glowing globes when his pack fell. With his good hand, he pulled a box of matches from his pocket and struck one. Okay. He confirmed that his immediate surroundings were safe. And then he tossed the match away, collapsing on his side for an unknown time. He knew he had to push his arm back into its proper position. When he was a young man, he had seen his farmer father... What's with these tongue twisters? His farmer father in a similar situation. He had had to help. What is with the fucking alliterations? He had to help the man reset his shoulder. Thank God, jeez. Today, Carnival would have to do it himself. He struggled to his feet. The pain made his head swim and almost fell. Again. He felt the wall in the dim amber hue light. He positioned his dislocated arm with his useful arm. He took 3 quick breaths. Not giving himself time to think about it, he rammed his body against the wall. He shrieked and fell to the floor, writhing in agony. Good God, put him out of his misery. Jeez. He shrieked louder the second time. He passed out for a time. He did not know for how long. After realizing that attempt didn't work either. The 3rd attempt had similar results. Finally, the 4th try gave him... The 4th try gave him success. He did not pass out, but lay resting in his own sweat for what seemed about an hour. Once he recovered, he climbed once again to his feet. He stood steadier than before. With 3 deep breaths, he gathered himself mentally and physically. At last, he decided to explore. He had reason to come here for... He came here for a reason, after all. He better dislocate his arm. He found himself with a series of tunnels wending their way through the vast, incomprehensible machines, or perhaps he considered parts of one large machine. The latter, he determined, seemed more likely. After burning through half his matches in his explorations, he found a pile of scrap synth in various sizes and colors. Mostly pipes, some of which were hollow, and others filled with cables and wires. Some were broken and jagged. Kalaval found a hollow pipe of white synth about 2 feet long. He used his knife to cut his leather cap into strips. Okay. Poking a strip down into the pipe, he created a makeshift torch. Clever. It wouldn't last long, and it created a lot of smoke, but it would last longer than a match. He had made many strips of leather and cloth to use. He climbed another shaft, and after wandering more, yet another. During each ascent, his torch failed him, and he had to relight it in the dim light once again. He reached the top. By the time he did this after the 3rd climb, a loud staccato burst of sound startled him. He dropped the torch and the buried leather strip fell out. The strange, irregular noise accompanied a flash of blue-white illumination. And again. In these brief instances of light, he saw something move. A panel in one wall opened. More light from within. With a yawning hiss, a silhouette emerged. Clattering. Whir. Groan. Okay. Ancient limbs stretched to life. Metal flesh wiring shambled in the form of a looming ape. God. Shagging... Where's my mind going today? Shaggy hair fluttered about it, as if each strand had its own prehensile life. White eyes glared from above a wide snout, symbols scrolling across them from side to side. Kalaval did not want to see more. He leapt down the shaft, throwing himself from rung to rung, letting gravity take him at speed. His shoulder was still tender, but he ignored it. A howl from above shook his bones. A dark shape blotted out the light from above. He climbed down faster. Recklessly, he dropped down the shaft. Each drop risked pulling his arm from its socket, but terror ruled his behavior, not pain. At the bottom of the shaft, he retraced his path through the winding maze of machine access conduits. He heard the thing land at the bottom behind him with a powerful grunt. He was sure that he could smell the beast too, musk and machine oil mixed with something he could not place. In the near darkness, he surged down the corridors, running a hand along the walls. The guardian thing he had woken was behind him, tracking him, by sound perhaps. Kalaval tried to be as quiet as he could, but soon gave up and erred on the side of speed. The thing could be following him by scent. It could even be following a heat trail of his own steps. He knew that such things were possible. Heat vision. Finally, he reached the pile of scrap tubing. The pipes, however, once he grasped the few, seemed far too light to be used as weapons. Instead, he grabbed the one about his height and got moving again. The bestial thing lumbered even closer. Kalaval reached the shaft down and dropped the tube. He was then followed down again, performing more of a barely controlled drop than a climbing descent. The creature came down behind him, closer this time, and gaining. Like Kalaval, it was dropping down, using the rungs only occasionally, but its drops were longer, its movements were more skilled. Kalaval reached the bottom of the shaft, but knew that the thing would reach him this time. In fact, he counted on it. He grasped the jagged length of synth tubing and thrust it up the shaft. One end braced against the floor. Immediately, the beast dropped down upon the tube, its weight snapping it in two, and knocking Kalaval to the ground. Ouch. Kalaval's head struck the wall. He saw white in the darkness. He found himself lying on the tremulous metal floor, unable to see. The sound of his own breath were drowned out by another sound. Rhythmic, wet, gurgling wheezes from not too far away. Kalaval struck a match. In the light, he saw the ape-like thing, with metal plates and fleshy parts, integrated in its cobbled whole. There was nothing beautiful, careful, or elegant about this thing's construction. Even its organic proportions did not seem to exist in any sort of natural relationship. The hair, like tendrils, writhed across its body, each ending in a tiny sphincter? What is it? Tiny sphincter mouth. Okay. And each tiny mouth writhed in agony, though the center of it bore a torso projected the broken tube. The momentum of the creature's descent had thrusted the shaft more than 3 feet into its innards. The beast did not move. Each breath was labored and filled with fluid, blood mixed with white milky liquids pooled in its body, around its prone body. Kalaval's fear turned to remorse, pity. He thought that the best thing he could do was bring the beast's suffering to an end. He wanted to give it a quick death. He had no idea how to do that. His small knife, now in his hand, seemed ridiculously tiny and fragile for the task. He approached closer in the light of a new match. But the creature howled and struggled to move, causing it far more pain. Kalaval sighed. His thoughts drifted back to Fennec. He sat on the floor and stayed with the creature until it drew its last labored breath. Talk about depressing, my god. Chapter 12, Machine's Heart, in which we learn the lesson of comprehension and understanding. In the mechanical parts of the dead Guardian, Kalaval had found some easily removed bits that, with some slight modifications and adaptations, he could use. Let's stop there. If he hadn't dropped most of his tools with the rest of his gear, he perhaps could have achieved more. Perhaps more important of them all were the glowing modules in the creature's eyes that, once removed, provided about as much light as his tiny torch. He knew that their illumination would fade, but in terms of his own needs, it would be long after it ceased being important. It would be long after it ceased being important. Sorry. With these new ciphers, he ascended back up through the obelisk's inner working. He crept slowly now, quietly. No more guardians appeared. He stopped to rest, and regretting having no food. He slept. Steadily, he climbed the length of the massive monolith, until the quivering of every surface reached a powerful intensity. Reaching the top of the 23rd shaft he had climbed, he determined that he had found the heart of the machine. At that level, he began to explore in earnest, carefully noting everything he found. The glowing cylinder stretched 20 feet across, 30 feet high. Made of blue metal, it gave off a blue-white glow. It floated 2 feet from the ground and hovered 2 feet from the high ceiling. Nothing connected from all the machinery around it, but Calaval knew that it was connected by invisible fields of energy and force. Where's the force? He wiped the sweat from his brow. The interior of the monolith was warm and humid. The air was stale, stifling. He needed to get inside of that cylinder. He studied its surface for hours, looking for an access panel or hidden hatch. He found nothing. He slept again, fitfully. He searched the walls of the large chamber around the cylinder. He studied them for mechanisms that might open or provide access to it. Finally, he returned to the cylinder and scoured its vibrating, glowing surface again. After a long last, he determined that there was a panel on its surface, a door, almost impossible to perceive, but there was no obvious way to open it. Driven by his new discovery, he returned to the machine-filled perimeter of the room. He followed the lines of the conduits that ran across their surface, up to the ceiling and down to the floor. He asserted, for the love of... whatever. He believed that the controls of some important function lay behind a large metal panel. When he tried to pry them off with a knife, its iron blade snapped. Ouch. He sat down on the floor, tired and hungry. Of course, he said out loud. That's what I would have said. He pulled out one of the components he had removed from the guardian creature, a weapon that had been built into its own arms, into one of its arms. He could coax its power for a different use of his own. Sliding open a tiny panel at one end of the device, he moved a tiny switch while pointing it at the panel. He saw nothing, but felt the fist thing almost buck out of his hands. He thrusted it towards the panel, which buckled with a loud bang and folded like paper. Guiding it with the device as though it was an invisible fist, he pulled back and the panel tore from its mountings. Interesting. Calaval tossed the device to the floor next to it with satisfaction. Oh yeah. The newly glass plate exposed flared to life and light, showing symbols and diagrams. Calaval recognized almost nothing, but after a few tries, touching the screen and moving the symbols as though they were objects rather than bits of light, he quickly figured out how to activate the cylinder's doors. Turning to face it, he watched as the square section of the machine's heart simply faded from sight. This revealed an empty but brightly lit interior. Without hesitation, Calaval entered the cylinder, and then stood elsewhere. Without realization of transition or translation, Calaval had moved vast distances, as he had hoped. Long ago he had learned of this place. High above him stretched a transparent dome. Through it, he looked up at the world. Displayed before him at the center jewel of a vast night sky panorama. There you go. Or rather, he reasoned, he looked down at the world. For he knew that he was in a citadel, created in eons past by inhuman hands, and placed in high above, permanently in the sky. Legend spoke of a citadel in the sky so high that it was barely visible from the ground. Calaval had seen it in Yessa's telescope, and the old woman in the Cloud Ridge has given him the secret of how to access it. Here, Calaval knew, were the true secrets of Numenera. Here he could perhaps, just perhaps, speak with one of the vast intelligences that had given life to prior worlds. If he could make his questions understood, he could find the knowledge that he sought to join the Aeon priesthood, and perhaps even become a prominent member of their ranks. Thus ends the second part of the Secret Chronicles of the Amber Papacy. Little did Calaval know that the knowledge he would gain would make him not an Aeon priest, but greatest among them, the High Father, greatest of the Aeon priests, and founder of the Order of Truth. All glory to the originators of truth and understanding. Praise to the innovators of steel and synth. Praise to the shapers of flesh, of bone, and of the mind. Glory to those who resculpted the sustaining earth and the life-giving sun. Praise to the senders of signals, who even now whisper into the machine's ears and give life to the inanimate. Praise to those who traveled to the stars and realms beyond the stars. All glory to the originators of truth and understanding. Numenera. And that is it for the story. I will now be reading the last page, which won't be part of the story, but it's pretty much from the author. Oh, it's about the author. Anyway, allow me to read. Monte Cooke. Monte had worked as a professional writer for almost 25 years. As a fiction writer, he had published numerous short stories, 2 novels, and a comic book series from Marvel, and had attended the Clarion West San Francisco and SFNF Writers Workshop. It's not even the story, I'm messing up the words. As a non-fiction writer, he had published The Skeptic's Guide into Conspiracies. Most notably, as a game designer, he had written hundreds of books and articles, best known for D&D 3rd edition. He also designed Heroclix, Petalus, Arcadia Evolved, Monte Cooke's World of Darkness, and many more. His new project is Numenera, a science fantasy game set in the far future coming from Monte Cooke's games. In his spare time, he investigates the paranormal as one of the geek seekers. Check out his work at montecooke.com. About Numenera. Numenera is a science fantasy role-playing game that is set in the far distant future. Humanity lives amongst remnants of 8 great civilizations that have risen and fallen on Earth. These are the people of the 9th world. Sound familiar? This new world is filled with remnants of all the old former worlds, bits of nanotechnology, the data web thread amongst the still orbiting satellites, bioengineered creatures, and myriad strange and wondrous devices. Can they come up with similar names? My God. These remnants have become known as Numenera. Player characters explore this world of mystery and danger to find these leftover artifacts of past, not to dwell upon the old ways, but to help forge their new destinies, utilizing the so-called magic of their past to create a promising future. Visit Numenera.com for all details. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed the reading of Amber Monolith. Have a nice day.